Hey man,
Hey,
how goes it?
how goes it? Well, it's been an interesting couple of weeks.
Yeah, yeah. I gathered.
you know, I mentioned it to you in that email. I decided to start kind of
Yeah.
getting back into the Feder work in all of this, and maybe that wasn't the best choice to make. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a it, and or sort of situation. That's not really the right phrase, but anyway, on one hand, the timing may not have been optimal, but at the same time, a lot of a lot of stuff has come up that needed to come up, and so there's been that coming up, and then we've had all kinds of stuff going on with Tuesday as this has happened, and so there's all kinds of stuff that has been, just kind of thrown in my way
Yeah.
that have been opportunities to do some investigative work. Um, and, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's stuff that's come up that has really made me uncomfortable. And, it's been a case of, well, what are you going to do with this? So,
What have you been doing with it?
I've been trying to sit with it as much as I can when the feelings come up, which sometimes is hard to do because there are times where I am in motion a lot. And so I don't get to sit with something when it comes up.
What happens while you're in motion and the sensation comes up, like you're feeling something, there's an emotional thing happening, but you're doing something. How is it showing up or being reinforced while you're doing other things?
Being reinforced.
Yeah, like because
Huh.
if you just have, I don't know if you want to give an example, but like if you're just going about your day and something comes up that triggers one of these old past things,
Mhm.
if you were like so embroiled in your day that you're immediately on to the next task and you're just completely present with what you're doing, that flush of whatever it is just going to last for some number of seconds and then
Right.
go back down. So if it's coming up and being potent and being sort of an issue while you're going about your day, then there's got to be some more buy-in to it. There's something more that's reinforcing it as you're going about doing other things. So
I don't know.
what is your experience like while you're doing this stuff?
Well, what happens more often than not is I'll recognize, okay, this is something I need to feel it and let it be. Um, but probably 8 out of 10 times, even though I'm trying to hold space for it and allow it to be, it just gets forgotten.
Forgotten? What do you mean?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
you forget to
I
do it?
lose track of that feeling, and my attention gets pulled to other things, and
Sure.
I just completely lose sight of that feeling that came up. It just gets kind of washed away um, in the flow of things going on, life stuff happening.
Which on one hand is fine because you're not adding to it. It's just something that's coming and going. It's not that you are then it doesn't sound like you're like perseverating on it and making it into something that's carrying out throughout your day. If can you then when you're not in movement sit down and bring up whatever it was that triggered it to begin with so that you can experience it in a place where you have more time to be with it?
I could. What I'd have to do is make notes of it so that I
Mhm.
can remember it later.
Yeah.
So I could do that. Yeah, I haven't, but that's certainly something I'm willing to do. I kind of put a little mental tag on it,
Yeah.
so that when that kind of thing happens, you know, later tonight or whenever, I go, okay, hold on, make a note so I can revisit it later. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be a good habit to get into that when something comes up that seems really potent and pertinent, that you then make a note, come back to it later when you can just sit with it and then do some inquiry around it and, whatever needs to be done with it. Then when you have time to actually do it, And that might be able to get to where it's not just that it's not bothering you for a moment during the day, but that you can really get to why it's coming up at all ever anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I'll start doing that. It's funny because not remembering to do that, uh, it's kind of like there's something else that's like that. Where's the other thing that, um, gosh, what is it? I'm totally drawing a blank. There's something else that's related to all of this work, um, and it has that same thing going on with it, where um, I could do it if I could remember to do it, but more often than not, I forget. And it's related to all of this stuff, and I'm completely drawing a blank. And it's so strange because I actually was going to mention it, and I've thought about it several times. Like, okay, I need to talk about this with him and get his take on it or his input. And now it's lost in the ether somewhere.
Well, it sounds like something really relevant when you do, because if you have that much like resistance to remembering it, focusing on it, bringing it up, it's probably something that's pretty potent.
Yeah, and I had, it's funny. I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't thought about it getting forgotten because of resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that is the case. I don't know, but um, yeah, but there's been, man, it's been a really rich time in the last week or so for opportunities to dig into things because I started listening to those videos of Pernilla's.
Yeah.
I guess it was Monday morning, and then some things came up around that. Um, some, I guess, what would you call formative emotional issues. Um, stuff, very much along the lines of the whole thing about being the one who's everything that's wrong with the family in the house I grew up in.
Yeah.
And some things cropped up with Tuesday, and that really stirred things up. Um, and then Susanna, what she's going through, stirred up some things that once again go back to my early years. And so there's been all these things that are just bringing the stuff up, and just like when it rains, it pours.
Yeah. Which is such a perfect thing when you're doing this work. I mean, it's where you really can be grateful that these things pop up. In the Buddhist tradition, our enemies are our spiritual, greatest spiritual friends, or there's another word for it that I'm forgetting, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So it's really wonderful that just as you decide you're going to get into this stuff, again, everything just is meeting you where you are, and here's
Yeah.
things to look at.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've never bought that idea. You'll hear people say everything happens exactly the way it's supposed to happen, and there are no accidents. I don't know about that. I really don't. I'm something inside says, yeah, you probably ought to be careful with coming to a firm conclusion about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I can say is that I have noticed over a period of many years that these things happen in a way that I've never been comfortable just chalking it up to
Yeah.
happenstance, accident, serendipity.
Yeah. 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 I'm always agnostic also on coming up with any definitive statements about how things, happen. But I think what we can say, just from the standpoint of like causes and conditions and the whole bubble of reality and all of that, is that it's that same basic phenomenon where if you are, when you start like when you buy a new car, or when you like, start looking at a particular type of car, and then all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere,
Yep.
it's that kind of pattern recognition that we have, where it's like all of a sudden this becomes a relevant thing, and now I'm going to see this all over the place. And so because you've now set your mind basically to look for things in this realm of like early childhood stuff, or old traumatic beliefs, or starting points. Now all of a sudden it's picking these things out. It's the same, like there's a great writing exercise. Well, it was I've heard like William Burroughs use it as a recommendation for writers, but I think also other people do it for other reasons. But you just walk around the block or walk wherever you're walking, and just think of color like blue. And then as you're walking, all of a sudden you will see so many things that are blue that you never would have noticed before. And then you do it again with yellow, red, just pick different colors. And all of a sudden things will just pop out at you that you just never would have seen, because it was not relevant to you as you're walking through. The brain just doesn't pick it up. It's just it's just kind of noise that's part of the signal. And so the more you are actually setting the mind to look for something, it does. And it's like, I don't know if you've ever tried this, but it is
Mhm.
kind of surreal. like we were actually Pernilla was getting some free plants from somebody in locally. And when we were there, the woman said she had lost was it like a spool of yarn or something, and it was blue. And so it was like outside, and so I started looking around for it. And I'm walking all around her property looking for it, and I'm just thinking like blue. And like the stuff that you see that like never would have, like a pen cap on the ground that's hidden under the thing, and all of a sudden it jumps out at you because like, oh, that's blue, oh, that thing's blue, that's kind of blue. And it's like, like the brain is like picking up anything that's kind of within that vicinity of color. And it's just so interesting. You can use this all the time for stuff. And it's wild, the selective perceptual power of it, by just setting that it's like there's the most basic intention to just say like a color, and the brain just follows and knows what to do. It's not like you're even doing it. It's not like you're like now I'm going to
Right.
find blue. It's like you just drop that stone into the lake, and just that color is just everything that you see.
Right.
um so I think there's that. And then there's also, with all of this, like the one thing that you had mentioned in the email is that certain members of the household remind you of your mother and your sister in different ways.
Mhm.
And again, it's that thing where they probably wouldn't remind somebody else of those people, even if they had been in your growing up with you. There's something where you have certain perceptions of the relationship and the way that your mother and sister were, and that has framed the way in which you see certain behaviors, and you see certain you know uh, ways of talking or ways of behaving. And so because we are creating our reality based on prior prior information, of course a large deal of what you are working with in your priors is that stuff that you picked up from them. And so as you are effectively creating for yourself the world around you and the people who are in that world, it's not a surprise that a lot of them bear striking resemblance to other people who have been majorly influential in your past.
Well, I agree with that, but I would also kind of qualify it by saying, and there may be a really prosaic explanation for this,
Hmm.
but it's interesting to me that Susanna also sees the exact same thing because she
Okay.
she she
Yeah.
knew my family really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
She spent a lot of time around them. In fact, at one point in time, after I had moved out, she wound up renting a room for my parents in their
Oh wow.
house.
Oh
So
wow.
she lived with both my mom and dad for I don't know how long, for a while.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, she knew them well, and my younger sister the same. And I remember the first time we discussed it, we had both come to that same conclusion about our daughter independently.
Yeah.
Started talking about
So
it one day. You
interesting.
too, really? Yeah, one of those sorts of things. So
That's
um,
so interesting. And Ken also.
and there's also the fact that, of course, Tuesday's on the spectrum.
Yeah.
We're almost certain that my younger sister is, and
Okay.
myself, my older sister, Susanna, and my uncle, my mom's brother, all think that the odds are pretty good that my mom is as well, because that would explain a lot about her.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So it is so interesting. Um, but it's great that you are in the place where you are open to seeing whatever comes up as it comes up, and just want to just reinforce that again. It's just being with the sensations. It's just being with the the arising emotion of it without there being too much playing into the storyline behind it. That because it's relevant to notice that, like, oh, this goes back to my scapegoating as a child, or me being the one that everybody said was the problem in the household. But just make sure that you're not reinforcing that narrative. That it's like, okay, here it is again. I can one thing that you might want to try doing is in the moment when it comes up, like even if you're doing other stuff, if you're feeling that feeling come up again and it seems really intense, take a moment to, while you're doing other stuff, even console yourself. Talk to that inner Darrell and
okay.
say, it's okay. It's not about you. You're loved. You're okay. You're safe. All the things that you would have needed to hear back then to calm that feeling of wrongness down, and feel what that does in the moment that you're doing it.
Okay. Now, what about those affirmations that you suggested? Because that's typically how I respond to it, is by practicing those in the way that you described, calling
Excellent.
up that compassion and love.
Yep.
Um, um,
Still stand behind that. This
okay,
is just
so
something
that
else. Like if you're in the moment and something comes up and it feels potent, and especially if it has that feeling that really directs you back to, oh, this is my issue with authority, this is my issue of being the bad one, right then, just as though little Darrell was right there, you're just in your mind, soothing, consoling, saying whatever he needs to hear to let let because realistically, you're not letting little Darrell know, you're letting big Darrell know. But it's more useful sometimes to think of it like that. But if you don't need it, you can also just do it like, this is me in the moment, just self-consoling, saying, it's okay. I'm fine. I'm not the problem. I'm, just whatever. I'm trying to think, because I know it's with neuro linguistic processing, it's not great to use negatives in there because we kind of hear I have a
yeah.
problem. So I'm trying to think of, like, instead of saying I'm not the problem, it's like trying to think of a positive way of rephrasing that. But
Well,
I'm okay.
that seems like that would kind of point towards using the affirmations the way I
Yeah,
have been in those
yeah,
situations, because those statements are very positive.
yeah, absolutely. But just feel into what happens as you're doing it. Really feel that sense of consoling, that sense of, you know, it's okay. It's okay. It's it's like really letting yourself know that it's not you that's the problem, that it's not saying anything more about you, that it's just a temporary um it's a temporary instance of something happening, and it doesn't, like when you were a kid and people were effectively letting you know, either directly or indirectly, that there was something wrong with you, that you were the problem all the time. You need to counteract that with the opposite, by letting yourself know that actually this had nothing to do with me. This had everything to do with their perception of me. It had to do with um, reactions that were coming out of you because of the mechanisms that you had picked up to try to deal with these things that were an unfair, unhealthy kind of situation. They were just coping mechanisms that you were working with, that there's no shame that you had to pick up coping mechanisms as a kid. There's no shame that they were maybe not something that you would choose to do as an adult, and unfortunately maybe were in some cases maladaptive, but there's no shame behind that. It's not a flawed person who is in there who had made that decision that now I'm going to become a rageaholic and I'm going to yell at everybody and I'm going to put my fist through a wall and all of that, because that is, how I choose to present myself to the world. There was no conscious decision behind that. It was a cause, or it was because of so many other causes that came before it, that was simply how it was. And just circling back to when you say about, that when people say like everything happens for a reason or it couldn't happen any other way, where there's truth in that is that it literally could not happen any other way,
because it didn't.
because it didn't. Given everything that had happened prior to that, that was the only conclusion. That was the only thing that could happen, was that little Darrell would become a rageaholic and he would get angry and he would do things. You don't have to make that personal. That is simply chemistry. That is simply as a biochemical reaction to a certain situation and a certain number of situations.
Actually, in some ways, even though, don't misunderstand me, there is a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of um, shame and guilt around anger. I mean, even though um, anger now is very mild and infrequent, even now, still, um, just these really mild expressions of it will provoke a lot of shame, guilt, and regret. But on the other hand, there's a part of me that understands why I did that, because actually there was a certain degree of, I'll put it in quotes, choice.
Mm.
I mean, there was just a confluence of things all coming together, and that's
Yeah.
that's 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 what the brain that's what the brain produced. But
Yeah.
conventional terms, it was, I hated being spanked, and I told my parents, "You do that again, and I'm gonna." I can't remember how I expressed it. It's been too long now, but I told them
Yeah.
I'm gonna retaliate,
Yeah.
and that idea was firmly planted in the mind. I'm ready to go. Next time this happens, whoa, watch out, because it's gonna be it's you're gonna want to get out of my way, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened. I forget which parent it was, but they went to spank me, and the next thing you know, there was a Tasmanian devil in the house. And it worked. It
Yeah.
worked. Talk about maladapted coping mechanism, but it worked.
Yeah.
And they started trying to find other ways to deal with me.
Yeah. And that's totally reasonable. I mean, you like, if it was in a movie, you would side with the kid, right? Like,
Right.
right? Like there's no shame about being in a situation where the child has learned how to very creatively get out of being abused, right? Like it's not like they were, cutting off your allowance for the week or taking away your candy for the day or something. Like, there's a reasonable uh reaction to not wanting to be physically abused.
Yeah. And
Just
I'll
because.
add, I want to add this, because I know there are a certain segment of people in the world who will have these thoughts about this. There will be those people. I don't feel this way, but there are people who say, well, spanking done the right way, for the right reason, is perfectly acceptable. And my answer to that would be, well, the only problem is I can tell you for a fact, because I could see it on her face and in her body language. My mom did it out of anger,
Mm.
and she lashed the living crap out of me. And
Yeah.
no one should be lashing the heck out of a little kid with a
No.
leather belt out of anger.
No.
It's one thing if you use your hand in mildly, and it's, you shouldn't have done that. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
not what happened in my house.
and I'll happily go on record and even say that I don't think that is in any way beneficial to anybody, and it leads to nothing but
Mhm.
detriment. Because even that,
I
you're still
agree.
showing the kid that physical violence, even if it's a light tap, is still telling you that that's a way to deal with
Yeah.
my, if you do something wrong, you get hit, or if somebody does something that I don't like, I can hit them.
Right.
That there is some sort of physical pain repercussion to doing something is in no way a justifiable uh parenting skill in 2024. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
No argument here.
yeah. So yeah, I think there's no apologies for that at this point.
And I'll add this one last final thing just to kind of complete the picture is, one of my earliest memories of being spanked was my dad. I couldn't have been any more than maybe 4, pushing it maybe 5. And my dad, and he was angry. I could tell. I could see it in his body language. I've
Yeah,
always had. I think I'm something about the way I'm wired because I could recognize that even at my earliest, in my
sure.
earliest years. But I could see the expression on his face. I could see the way he was moving, and he was
Yeah.
angry. And the next thing you know, he's got me by one arm in the air, spanking me. You don't hold a kid by one arm in the air and spank him.
You do not. You absolutely do not. So the Tasmanian devil was completely justified.
Yeah, I think so.
That it's a reasonable reaction to that kind of a situation.
Yeah,
So the the shame and the guilt about it is one thing, which
right,
again can be addressed because you can see from that perspective why that happened.
right. I never
You
thought
can,
of it like that. Huh. Thanks for that.
of
That's
course.
that's a good piece of information to plug into that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think of it like this was a movie that wasn't about you. And whose side would you be on in that movie, right?
Yeah.
That little Tasmanian devil, you're like, go, dude, go, tear
Yeah.
that piece apart,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So having that kind of holdover of feeling of shame or guilt about it is just it, it's not helping anything now, but it's also misplaced. The you were never in a position to be shamed for what you were doing in the first place. So holding on to that now isn't doing anything for your future behavior or anything else.
Oh, wow. That's a good point because I had not only had I not thought of that, I actually had been seeing it from quite the opposite, that those feelings would be um, useful in motivating this person to not do those things.
It's,
So, that's not really effective. And that actually makes sense when I think about some of the things I've read over the years about conditioning and the way the mind works. Um, so okay, yeah, uh,
what we usually say about that is that like a brief in the moment kind of regret is pro-socially helpful, right? Like if you
okay,
do something now, you say you get angry and you yell at Susanna, and then you have this moment of regret about that. That is beneficial for changing the future behavior where you might not get angry and yell again, right? It
fine.
was like, oh, okay, that didn't feel right. I'm sorry I did that. You apologize. That's great. It's the shame where all of a sudden now I become a bad person
Mm,
because I have a history of getting angry and yelling at people. And that means that I am going to do this again in the future. And there is just something fundamentally broken about me, that I am a type of person who can't handle rejection or whatever the situation was.
right.
Um, and so the real difference there is that the regret is about the action and shame is about the person.
Huh.
You can regret an action, but it doesn't say anything about you as like, you know, um, the identification of or the coloration of the person. Whereas shame says that there is something actually shameful about me, not just the action, but
Yeah.
there's something about me which is perpetually a problem.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. It does. It's just with processing that because that's
Yeah.
I had never really considered it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, being conscious when you do something that you would rather not do again and feel that immediate regret for it, that's great. That's fine. Just let that be there, feel it, notice that that is just this kind of inner wisdom alerting you to the fact that maybe I've hurt somebody or made them uncomfortable and I don't want to do that again. Make a mental note, I'm going to try not to do that again. Great. You've fed a new seed into the works. It might sprout as a flower in the future. You know, you've changed the course of the future in some way by having that thought. You've
But these
planted something.
tribunals, but these tribunals, on the other hand, are um, well, you could ask somebody, well, why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. So why, what benefit is it serving you to hold on to the shame of things that you have done for decades or haven't done for decades?
I don't think there's any benefit. I think where it's coming from is as a kid from a very early age, seeing unwanted behavior equals punishment. And so I think it's just a learned behavior to,
Mhm.
there's now, with the exception of, say, authority figures outside of us who we interact with under certain circumstances. Well, in this case, there's not really, I mean, barring some sort of extreme, there's not an outside authority. It's on me, and then of course people, immediate to me. So who's going to play that role? Well, you've got that. I guess we could call him an internal parent,
Mhm.
and there's the punishment, which is what I grew up with.
Yeah, yeah. So turning that around so that you don't need punishment to behave correctly, right? Positive reinforcement is stronger than negative reinforcement.
Yes.
So you can instead have that gentle positive attitude where if you get angry, if you get frustrated, if something comes up, instead of chastising yourself and immediately, spanking yourself for having done this thing again, you take that, it's okay. You know, I'm safe. I'm whatever it was, calm it down. And this is why we do so much stuff with the precursor to it of feeling like, okay, what was happening before you got angry and lashed out, so that you can have more of an awareness of it in the future, so that there's more space between a feeling coming up, a sensation coming up, and a reaction to it happening. So there's a gap in there, so that there's a chance to do something different than the old behavior, which it sounds like you have had a lot of. That there's a lot less of the um, you know angry, frustrated, acting out than there used to be. So
Oh
that's what's
yeah,
happening.
significantly
So
so.
right. So instead of in you have to look at the big picture of it, where the overall trajectory is going a different direction now. Every now and
Yeah.
then there are still little times when you jump back onto the old track a little bit or something, but for the most part, more of those for some reason I have in my mind like a wooden groove with like ball bearings going down it, and it's like more
Huh.
of the ball bearings are going down the just sitting, feeling, being calm and centered and controlled, as opposed to going the route that brings you to lashing out or making her feel bad about something. So every now and then that happens. And then you just note, well, what was it that was strong enough that jumped that ball bearing into that other channel instead of the one that it's been going down the most recently? And there's no shame about it. There's no shame that I'm a person who still has this channel that occasionally goes to reactivity. It's just recognizing that overall, most of them are going towards calm and civility now. Every now and then something does. So what is it that's like too much energy, that instead of letting those ball bearings go on that track, it jumps them back into the other track? It's like so much energy that it just pops them over into the old track again.
Boy, I don't know how to answer that with much specificity. I mean, I know that there are two sides to this, or two parts to this answer. Under ordinary circumstances, I think it has something to do with um, whatever I'm dealing with in that situation, what kind of, what is the context? Is it something that is touching on something that's deep seated or deeply rooted, or however you want to say it? It's something that really strikes at those. Um, um, I'm assuming it's the negative ideas of a self. Um, the things that I was told by my mom, my sister, etc. Um, but it's hard to be more specific than that. Then the other one is, the other half of this answer is that, um, and I emailed you about this, that here in the last couple of weeks, the caffeine use has reappeared, and fortunately, and I don't understand why, fortunately, it has not created or brought about the degree of, or really any of the reactivity that it has in the past.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I mean, that really is surprising. I mean, I have some
Yeah.
theories, but that's another story.
Sure.
That's for another discussion. But um, you know, last night when I got a little impatient, um, and then I was kind of abrupt again this morning, and my feeling is that it's just having a stimulant in my blood system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that classically in the past has set it off reliably, and the
Absolutely.
frequency. Now it's, like I said, fortunately, it's not happening at all the way it used to. Because I would have heard if it had.
Yeah.
I would have been, something would have been said in very short order.
Yeah.
Susanna would not let that fly.
Yeah.
Um, but even at the level that things are happening, as mild and not even infrequent. I mean, it's happened a couple of times. So with just a few incidents, still in those moments, like, okay, so now it's starting to rear its head. Now I'm starting to see the effects of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in terms of, it's just something that is lowering your it's lowering your threshold for what you can handle. And if you are already having a lot of kind of subtle reactivity, if you are having that sort of brewing irritation that was there all the time, then of course you're just lowering the threshold of how much it takes before
Right.
that causes some sort of outburst. And now there's less of that. There's less of that undercurrent of irritability and frustration and unease with being alive, that, right, in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you lower that threshold a little bit, the stuff that's underneath it isn't enough to be, coming up above that threshold. It's not
Right.
something that, um you're, the the compressor doesn't have anything to you know to attack, or the limiter, it doesn't have anything to pull down, because
Nice
it's just,
analogy.
thank you, yeah, it's just not coming up high enough to trigger it.
Right.
So that's great. um in general, I mean, I would still say it's probably making things a little bit harder when these things happen, to work with stuff, just because you are putting yourself in a slightly heightened, medicated kind of a state. um but again, there's no judgment about that, there's no morality to it, it's a little bit trickier. I mean, uh Zen Buddhism, you have the monks drink green tea all the time because the
Right.
caffeine helps keep you alert and able to meditate for much longer periods. So
Right. Well,
there's,
since we're on this subject, I do want to make sure that one thing is clear, because hopefully before we're done tonight, there's some things that I wanted to
yeah,
your attention, but I don't care for this. And given my preference, this is not something I want to do. This is a habit that reasserts itself from time to time, and I would prefer the habit didn't reassert itself at all. And I actually have been working with the suggestion you made about what is the feeling that precedes it when the urge to
Mhm.
do that comes along.
Good.
And we can come to that in a minute because there's some stuff there that I'm not quite getting it.
Okay.
But and that was the thing I was trying to remember earlier. That's the thing that more often than not I forget. You know, I want to work with whatever that feeling is that comes up that sets off that urge or compulsion or whatever we want to call it. Um, I forget, and the next thing you know, I've finished a cup of coffee and I'm going, God, I really don't want to be doing this. Okay, next time I'm going to remember to work with what sets this off and
Yeah.
try to see if we can begin to undo this. So I really don't want to do it. I can give you every reason in the world why not to. I really can't give you much. I can only give you a limited reason and only under very, very, very limited context or circumstances, rather, or conditions. Why? Why? Yes, but really, the greater majority of the whole thing is weighted for no. I mean, like 99.9% no.
Yeah. So, um, why? What would decaf coffee provide you that, or not provide you that caffeinated coffee does?
I'm not exactly sure because decaf is actually fine. I actually, there were days I've had that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the caffeine, based on the little bit of digging I've been able to do so far, um, I think first it's just mood changing,
Mm-hmm.
mood and mind altering. You know, I mean,
Yep.
we've talked about it many times. You know,
Yep.
I got sober in AA in 2004.
Yep.
You know, so there's that tendency,
Yeah.
and that's something that's reared its head in my life for a long time. So I think that's one part of it is just very simply altering mind and mood. Um, but there also seems to be something at work. There was one time when I remembered to work with that feeling when it came up. And of course, the funny thing is that that feeling that precedes the urge to go and consume caffeine is fleeting. I mean, unless I'm
Of
missing
course.
something, it just seems like and it's gone. It's there and it's
Of
gone.
course. Yeah. Of course.
And but I managed to catch it once, and it was really kind of an interesting experience because I caught it, and the feeling was gone, but there was this sort of this. At the time, the word that came to mind was after image, and
Mm-hmm.
so I caught this after image
Yeah.
and was able to kind of hold on to it. And like, what is here? And in doing that, all of a sudden there was, and it was a split second. I mean, it was there and gone. Was a mental picture of me as an infant. And I don't know that it was actually in words, but there was this mental sense of, and again, it wasn't in words, so I don't know that this is really the
Yeah.
word, but there was this sense of neglect or not being looked after. And uh, it was really surprising, you know, because I wasn't when I remembered to catch that feeling, there
Yeah.
was no expectation. I didn't have any preconceived notions. It was just catch the feeling, see if we can work with
Yeah.
this. Let's begin to see if we can do something to weaken this drive to do this.
Yeah. That's great.
And so it was really kind of surprising to have that mental picture and that sense of neglect pop up. And that brought to mind a memory that I've had since there are people I've told this to, and they said, "There's no way you can remember that you're an infant." But I verified this with my mom when it came up once when I was, I guess, probably in high school.
Yeah.
I asked her about where my crib was in the room, what was in the room, how it
Yeah.
was arranged. She verified everything, so my memory was correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a memory of in my crib late at night, early morning, being incredibly upset. And so my mom comes down, and I don't really recall all the details. I just remember that my mom showed up. There was a bottle of what I later figured out, you know, as a kid. It's like, oh, this is that stuff. A bottle of cherry Kool-Aid,
Hmm.
and put a blanket over me, and she was gone.
Uh,
And that um, kind of underscores or um, paints the picture of how my mom was with me.
mm,
I mean,
yeah,
there were times as a little kid, I mean, little, hadn't even started school yet.
yeah.
My mom would be doing something, I'd disappear. I
Wow.
remember she once got a call from the grocery store down the road. I have no idea how they knew to call my mom, let alone how
Wow.
to get her number. I'd love to know the answer to that one. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
I was getting into the candy and they called my mom. My mom came and got me. She didn't even realize I left the house,
Wow.
and we had lots of things like that. So, there's this whole thing of neglect.
Yeah.
And hang on, I'm not going to try to test my memory. Um, I did some writing about this. You're going to have to wait, sweetie. Of course, she won't.
Mhm.
Uh, Let me see, because the language I used here writing about this earlier, um, um, assuming I can find it. Um, mm, well, now I can't find it, and of course, my own handwriting is difficult enough to decipher. um, but I know I use the word neglect. Um,
Speaking of neglect, you have a
yeah,
dog back there who is
yeah, I hear it. I'm gonna
very,
get her in a second. Um, okay. So, referring to this particular thing I'm telling you about, in
yeah,
other words, it's on the same thing. Um, Feeling of being unwanted, of being disregarded, not being important, cared for, or worthy of love, time, and attention.
yeah,
So to say neglect is kind of leaving a lot out.
yeah, yeah, I got that. Um, does it feel like then when you have coffee or something like that, that this is your stand-in for like not neglecting yourself, for doing something for yourself? It might not be, you know, what you would choose to do given that, but does
Yeah,
it feel like when you do it, it's because you have been sort of neglecting some aspect of your own needs in the past, and this is one of those like, okay, but I'm just going to have this chocolate bar because it's going to make me feel like I'm doing something for myself. I'm going to have this coffee because this is for me, even if it's not that specifically phrased.
I don't know if it's that or not. It could be. Right now, the way it feels is that it feels like there is a feeling when I got attention from either of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Attention, and in that kind of the implication of affection.
Mm.
And when when it comes to consuming, say, coffee or any number of other things, there is that sense of pleasure. And I feel like that somehow that sense of pleasure is either a substitute for stand in or somehow playing a role of that thing that I really got very little of. And I'm going to have to think I wanted more of. I mean, I don't really have any
Yeah,
recollection of what I thought about this as a kid, how I
of
felt about
course. Of
it.
course.
All I've ever been aware of over the course of my life is just that there was really almost none of it.
Yeah.
So that's where my mind went with this, is that it's a pleasurable feeling, and it's a way of trying to find a surrogate for that that thing that I didn't get much of.
And that could be. Um, it does bring me back though to where you had said about, having that proclivity for mood altering substances and that sort of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, the only reason why we want to do that is because the mood that we're in, or the mind state that we're in right now, is in some way unacceptable, uncomfortable. And so that gives us the impetus to try to alter it in whatever way. So that's why I'm so. Of course, there can be just maybe an interesting value to seeing things through different perspectives, which is why people do, psychedelics and things like that. But
Right.
if it's one of those like, I don't want to have this thing, but I'm having it anyway. I'm doing it okay, but I'm not going to do it tomorrow. There's a reason for that having done it today. And if it's a mood altering, mind altering substance, even something like caffeine, the reason has to be that there is something about where you are now before the caffeine that is in some way unacceptable. That there's some way this is less comfortable than how I would feel after having the caffeine. Doesn't mean it's actually true, but that's that drive to do something to change how I feel right now.
Let me put her out real quick.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, yeah, and I think you're right. I just it's a question of, well, what is it then? Because the explanation of being tired, because I really I there's a lot of aversion to the sensation of being tired.
Yeah,
That only accounts for a certain percentage of
absolutely.
the times that happens. There are times where, if we're going to say it's on the basis of not wanting to feel tired or being tired and needing to function, there are times when that's it's not the case. It's just not happening. So the only thing that comes to mind is um, that there is some sort of um, discomfort or being ill at ease
Mm-hmm.
with how things are right now. And
Yeah.
so there's a drive to change how you change what feelings are present, um, in order to get away from an experience of the moment now
Yeah.
that for some reason is unsatisfactory or uncomfortable or I don't know what.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So it's really being very, very aware in those moments before you have the coffee. What am I feeling? And it might be something as simple as a sensation in the body that doesn't even have like a strong emotional component to it. There might be
Huh.
something that just feels vaguely irritating in some way. It might be the feeling tired, but notice even if it's that, can you be with the feeling of being tired, which incidentally is itself a mood altering state, right? Like it's being tired is already what do you call it? An influenced, uh,
Yeah, it's like, for lack of a better way of
altered
talking about
state.
altered state. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that by itself is the way that it is, like you don't have to do anything to get to that. That's already changing it from what it was. See then if there is something really uncomfortable with being tired, can you be with the raw experience of being tired without making it into something more problematic than it is? I
Hmm.
I get it can be hard, if you're really groggy and you have stuff that you have to do that is taking a lot of mental bandwidth. That can be tricky, but just really seeing, is there, because it doesn't sound like it's like a conscious need, like it's not like a calculated use of it, like, okay, I'm very tired, I need to do this paperwork now, and if I have this amount of caffeine, it's just going to bring me back to kind of normal, and then I'm going to be able to do the, it doesn't sound like that. It's more like it has that addictive quality to it where you're doing it before you really realize that you are doing it, and then having regret about it afterwards.
Yep, I would agree.
So um I really think there's something more primal that's happening that's just kind of pushing that behavior along. uh, without it being a conscious effort
Hmm.
or conscious choice.
Well, I'd love to know what that is because I'd love to find a way to um, unplug this.
Yeah. And
And I,
that's just going to be a matter of really feeling into the experience, like in the morning, if that's when you have your coffee, or sometimes when you have it. Be aware from the time that you get up and go to the kitchen and all of that, what is actually being felt here, what thoughts are popping up, what is showing up for you in that experience pre-coffee, because you have to, like, do you have to make the coffee? Is
no, we don't keep anything to make it in the house. So I get up when I'm out and about. And I got, I have to drive school Tuesday to school clear across town every morning.
okay.
So there's an hour in the morning I'm out of the house, and that's usually when that happens.
So that's a really good indication then. So you're out of the house, but it's something where you have to like divert over into Starbucks or whatever to get the coffee. Like
Right.
there has to be this thing. It's not like, Susanna has a pot of coffee on the already pre-made and you just kind of pour
Right.
yourself a cup, and there's a bunch of calculated steps in there that make it to where you actually have the coffee in hand.
Yeah, there's plenty of time to be thinking about this in advance.
Exactly. So feel that whole time. Is it after you drop Tuesday off to school that you usually get it, or is it on the way
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. After.
So notice from the time that you've dropped her off and you start driving back home or wherever else you're going, start to notice now what is happening in the mind, what is happening in the body, what does it feel like you need to change in some way or get rid of in some way that coffee could possibly have any sort of effect on.
Okay. And, the handful of times I've been able to remember to do that, um, it doesn't, I can't get a fix on anything.
Um, when you were trying to find it, was it that you actually had no unwanted sensations at that point, or any thoughts that seemed in any way problematic? Or was it just that you couldn't come up with something that felt sort of consciously relevant in that moment?
Um, yeah, all of the above. I would, paying attention to what's going on internally, thoughts and somatically. Um, I just didn't get a fix on anything. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not anything there.
Sure.
I mean, it could be really subtle, and I understood that. I guess I was surprised. I guess because considering the nature of all of this, I thought there would be something more obvious or conspicuous.
Yeah.
I thought there'd be something that really was, something that I guess kind of an unconscious expectation was there's going to be something there that really um, has some weight to
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
in order for this to be the case.
Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. But in that case, I would say trying a different approach and saying, what does that feeling of uh, need feel like? Like you're driving home, and then you have this some sort of urge to get the coffee. There's something there that sparks the idea of coffee.
Right.
What does that feeling of wanting the coffee feel like?
That's kind of hard to describe. Um, it's a mixture of there's kind of this and some of this stuff is really so hard to
Yeah.
find words for, but not quite a contraction.
Mhm.
Boy, I really can't find a word for that sensation.
Mm.
Um, well, let me come back to that. Maybe I can get a fix on that after I go to the other portion of it. The other part is because kind of a sense of um, anticipation, um, looking forward to something, a sense of, well, you know how it is when you're considering anything that you find enjoyable or desirable, that that kind of, yeah, this will be good,
Yeah. Yeah.
something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's that part of it. This the promise of enjoyment, which really that is pretty ironic considering that um, truth is that caffeine really, at best, it makes me feel not so good.
Yeah.
At worst, it makes me feel like absolute crap.
Yeah.
A case of God, I wish I'd quit doing this, which is really frequent.
So
Um,
would you have that same anticipation of enjoyment if it was a decaf?
possibly,
So
possibly.
why don't you try that the next time? Try getting a decaf and see if there's any resistance to the decaf before you get it. See if there are any thoughts that pop up saying why you need the caffeine instead.
There is. I can tell you,
Okay.
I
Okay.
already have noticed that.
So what's that?
Well, that I mean, there's a resistance to it, and there's something that tries to justify, self-justify, um, having caffeine.
But like what kind of arguments? Like what
Um,
your microphone dropped all of a sudden too. That was really weird.
really?
Yeah.
Is it still low?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
It was good. And then all of a sudden just went bloop.
Huh. Let me see. Let me turn off the automatically adjust. Is it still low?
Yep. Try
Um,
turning it back on and see if that bumps it
okay.
to
Any difference?
no.
No.
Oh wait, yeah. There we go. Try it again. Say something.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, yeah, you're back.
Okay.
Interesting. I don't know.
Computer audio, a nightmare.
Yep, yep.
Okay. So,
So what are those thoughts that come up giving
oh
you
yeah, yeah,
such,
that's right.
important
Tired, don't want to be tired. Didn't get much sleep last night, which is frequently true, but doesn't justify it. Um, uh, um, going to need something to get through the day. Oftentimes, I'm driving and I'm uh, finding myself, almost kind of nodding off, like, well, you've got to be safe while driving. Um,
that is true.
and that is
That is
true.
actually a valid point.
Yeah, it is. But
I
at the
mean,
same time, I mean, there's got to be some other way. Um, there are probably some other things I can't think of what they are right now. And that other thing that I couldn't quite find words for is there's just this. Um, I don't want to call it a contraction because that's not quite right, but there's this sort of, it's like the system kind of tenses up. It's like, kind of this physical equivalent to the idea of, or the words, I need that.
hmm. I feel like with this one, it's a little bit more complicated because you have, I think, the actual need for more rest, more sleep, more, the body is in some sort of sleep deficit or, needs the energy. Caffeine obviously isn't the only and best source for that because there are so many negative side effects from it. The best thing would actually be like a nap. The best thing would actually be more sleep,
Yeah.
doing things that help you rest more, because then I think a lot of this, well, okay, so I think a lot of this probably would go away if you had more, if you were well rested. The physical needs for stimulation might not be there. And then that kind of gets rid of the caffeine need, unless and this is where it would be interesting to see, is if you were rested and you still have the need for caffeine, then it's not about being tired. It's still serving some other purpose. The other flip side of that is if you go from being well rested, no longer craving the caffeine, but then have some new thing that is taking over, that's that new, okay, but I just have to have chocolate, or I just have to have, kratom, or whatever the other thing is, that like this is the new thing that I want now, then that's a good indication that it's not really about the caffeine. It's the addiction itself, which is again still getting you from away, trying to distract you from feeling something that you are uncomfortable with.
And I really think that's what it is, because even when there's enough rest and I wake up and I'm not tired, and not even just recently, but just in general, that 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 urge, that desire can rear its head.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of, and it may just be pure coincidence, but I thought it was kind of interesting, and possibly indicative that this reared its head um, right after Susanna had her surgery and started having to look after her and then everything else, and um, and talk about things that we don't want to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is something I became aware of in the last few days was, and it's not anything new. I've been aware of this before. It just I was overlooking it for the last week or so. Is that having to take care of her and her being um, in the state she's in and trying to recuperate has brought up or brought back to mind um, these times when one time was when my mom was in the hospital when I was grade school age. And that was a very traumatic and very difficult set of events. And then after my mom was diagnosed with MS when I was 12, and when she was diagnosed with MS when I was 12, the house just kind of shut down for a while.
Mm.
And the lights wouldn't be turned on, curtains wouldn't be opened, and you
Wow.
didn't see my mom sometimes for a week. She would just be in the bedroom upstairs, and something about her being, she's recuperating, she's not ill, but she's, you know can't think of the word for this, but this, the state that she's in at post surgery, and having to look after her, take care of her, has kind of brought all that up again.
Yeah.
And I could be completely going down a blind alley here with this, but
Mm.
it crossed my mind that because it does really bring up a lot of discomfort and um, unpleasant feelings, and so kind of have to wonder if there's not something in here about trying to avoid those feelings, trying to keep all those feelings at bay.
Yeah.
Because the degree to which this, well, not just the situation, but also her and the situation remind me of my mom is really, it's really almost kind of too much.
Yeah.
I really, I wish that was not the case. I don't like having to remember those things. I don't like having to relive it. I don't like having Susanna associated with it. I don't like having her remind me of my mom.
Yeah.
Um, but this is how it is.
It is, but this is a new opportunity to reframe all those things.
Okay.
Because remember, every time that we experience a memory, it's not like watching a home movie where it's on videotape or something. It's a
Right.
refabrication of a time. So every time you have remembered that thing, it's been different. And every time that
Uh,
you look at it, you're looking at it from the perspective of where you are now.
hmm.
And so you have the ability to remember those difficult times with your mom and reframe it in a way where, you know this isn't to take anything away from how, awful it must have been to be neglected in that way and to be in that situation.
Okay.
But you're not now. And having that memory come up, if it brings those feelings of neglect with it, if it brings those similar felt sensations of what you felt like then, notice that this is just sensation that is happening right now in 2024 in the body, and that the ideas that you have about it, right? You'll if you see a memory where it's like you see an image of um you being in the house with it being dark and lights are off and she's in bed and all of that, you're seeing a mental image that's showing up right now. It's not the real thing. You're not
Right.
actually still there. This is just a mental image. The 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 feelings that come up with it can be detached from that image, and you just simply feel what it feels like right now in the body. Those two don't have to equate to the really awful feelings that you felt as a kid that were so huge when you were in that position. Now, if you feel it now, it's because you're still looking at it from the perspective of what it felt like as that child. Can you see that image now from an outsider perspective? Can you see the image of that child in the room and feel not what it felt like to be him, but feel that, like, caring, compassionate, wanting for him to be in a safe, happy, healthy environment? And notice that, you have that capacity now to remember that in a way where you can feel that for him, not locked into the role of that child, but as somebody who has more perspective on it, because you're no longer in that situation. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I do.
And feeling the sensations that come up with it, recognizing that these are just sensations that are happening now in the moment, that are not connected to you being in a certain place or in a certain way now. The If you feel like it's so uncomfortable being with the body in that state because Susanna is, going through something which brings up some of these memories for you, recognize that those sensations do not actually relate to Susanna. They don't actually relate to your current environment. They're relating to a mental image that is popping up in the mind because we are pattern recognizing machines. And it's saying, oh, this reminds me of a similar situation when I remember when somebody that I loved was in a hospital. I remember when somebody that I loved was sick. This is what it must feel like. That comes up, and now you're no longer relating to Susanna in this moment in 2024 in your house. You're relating to what it was like as a whatever year old with your
Mhm.
mom. So
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so you're saying that the physical sensation, the bodily sensation, relates to the mental picture,
Yeah.
and then that's it. There's not any connection to what's going on externally. That's just turning that into an overlay.
Effectively, yeah. You are you are sorry, losing my voice. Um, it's kind of like if you really like one actor, and so you watch all of his movies because you really like him and everything, and this movie might not be quite as good as another one that you've liked, but you still like it kind of because you like him and you're giving him all of the credit for all of the movies that he's done in the past. It's like, oh, okay, I'll overlook the fact this one isn't great because I still really like him as an actor. It's that kind of a thing where you're not relating to her as she is, and you're not relating to this situation of you as the caregiver in this moment. You're relating to it with that overlay, as you said, or with that baggage, that this has to connect to that time period too, because I feel this now, so it must be related to what is going on in the room now, but it's not.
Hmm.
What you're feeling now doesn't have to do with her necessarily. It is often dealing a remnant of a reaction to a memory or some other thing, which is popping up now. It's happening in this, the memory is happening in this moment. You're relating to it in this moment, but it's not related. But what you're feeling isn't related to the actual external environment. It's related to the internal mental environment.
Which, and this is by way of trying to kind of make sure I understand it, explaining
Yeah.
it, try to
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
um, that this, uh, what has been experienced in this circumstance in the last couple of weeks could happen potentially with anyone I was closely involved with.
Yeah.
So, in other words, it's not specifically about Susanna, which means it, getting back to your point,
Yeah.
it's not about what's happening out here.
Exactly.
It's all an internal thing
Yeah.
based in the past.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. If you were really freshly engaged with what's here, completely detached from anything in your past, like you have just woken up and been reborn today, right? And you're interacting with her now. Sure, depending on how tired you are or whatever, you're going to have different amounts of bandwidth or whatever. You can only handle so many things. But in general, what you are feeling is not going to have like think about it this way. If you had absolutely no memory whatsoever, anything that came before 5 days ago, or
Okay.
whatever, a year ago,
Yeah.
when you are in that situation with her, doing the caretaking, doing what you do, seeing how she is, would any of that bring up the same sorts of emotions that you currently feel when you feel like she reminds you of your mother? And I don't want that. I feel this because it reminds me of being neglected back then. It reminds me of being abandoned. If you didn't have any of those memories, if that was completely cut out and you only had from this point on,
Well,
would you
no,
still feel that?
no, it'd be impossible to because I wouldn't have any of that experience to pull from.
So that's the clue that you aren't actually interacting with it in this moment. You're not interacting with what's here, you're interacting with memories.
Well, and I see your point, and
Yeah.
and I I understand and agree.
Yeah.
Um, the thing I'm wondering how to handle is it's interesting because these feelings are not overwhelming. This is not like, say, intense anger or overpowering grief,
Mm-hmm.
but in its own quiet, subtle way, it has something to it that has enough energy or something, I'm not sure what to call it, that it makes it kind of hard to step back from.
Mm. How does it showing up for you? When you say it's hard to step back from it, are they physical things that we're talking about? Is it that you're caught into thoughts that kind of go thought by thought by thought by thought?
I think it's more it's physically in the body. Well, I think maybe it's some of both. I think maybe it's some of both because on one hand, the physical sensations that accompany these thoughts and mental pictures are um, I kind of get sucked into those. But there's also the thoughts, the fact and I can't tell you exactly what I thought have thought specifically. I just know it's in the general ballpark of um, this reminds me of my mom.
Mhm.
I don't want my wife and life partner to remind me of my mom. That creeps me out. Um,
But
I don't want to make, I don't want to have this association between these two people. You know,
but do you see how that is being created sort of in the moment by that she doesn't have to have any relationship to your mom. There is something where I'm saying that um
hmm,
you know of I once saw a pink hibiscus. I'm seeing another hibiscus. Every time I see this hibiscus, I have to think of this other hibiscus that I saw back in this other situation. It's
okay.
like, do you know what I'm saying? So,
Uh,
so notice when that is happening, that is not a foregone conclusion, that there has to be that trigger there that reminds you of your mom. You can break that cycle by really being aware of the fact that this is happening to begin with, that
okay.
I'm with Susanna, and then a thought comes up that shows you, is it that it shows you like an image of your mom, it shows you a certain situation, is there how what pops up that gives you that moment of, ooh, this reminds me of.
Both, some of both. I mean, seeing my mom, um, how she appeared as a person, as well as just seeing these sort of random scenes, like seeing the living room with all the blinds pulled.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that actual scene ever existed in reality. It's
Yeah.
just, something that the mind is putting together that's a representation of
Yeah.
what was experienced then.
Yeah, that's fair. But it's where it's really important to come back to what is currently here, and
Okay.
that association doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
That association doesn't need to dictate how you actually feel about her, or how you see her now. It's important to recognize when it's happening, that, oh, I'm drawing this false parallel here between these two. There is a piece of software that is trying to find similarities, and it has found a similarity,
Ah, okay.
right? I'm sure you can find thousands of ways in which she does not remind you of your mom,
You're right. I hadn't thought of that.
but that's not where the brain is. It's looking
Right.
to find similarities, not differences at this point.
Hmm.
So because those things were potent, and because those things with your mom had a lot of physical weight and a lot of physical baggage to them, a lot of emotional baggage, then anything that gives you like a hint of that is going to be really sticky. Right?
Right.
If you had like an amazing relationship with your mom, and she was just the most wonderful person you'd ever met, and then you have these moments where Susanna reminds you of her, yes, there are ways in which it's kind of weird to feel that about somebody that you're in a relationship with, obviously, but
Right.
I assume that you wouldn't have that same resistance to feeling like she reminds you of good things about somebody that you like,
Right.
you
I see.
know
Yeah.
so it's really it's that association with your mom and all of the trauma and the terrible stuff that you remember about her, and then not wanting to overlay those on Susanna, which is
Right.
reasonable. But you can then recognize when it's happening that she isn't her. She's not your mom. Just because she's been injured and had surgery and has health problems does not make her your mom.
Right.
It's just drawing a conclusion between, oh, I remember another woman in my life who had health problems, and this is what happened. Those two are not synonymous. So you have that moment to wake up in that moment to what is actually here right now. This is a completely different person in a completely different situation. And if you can tune into what you're feeling about her, as opposed to those thoughts that are flashing in the mind and the sensations that are related to them, that breaks that connection between what you are putting on the situation because of the past baggage, between, and then what you're feeling like now in 2024, which, as a in a caregiving role, it might not be all sunshine and rainbows. You might feel tired, you might feel overstretched, and you know like you're neglecting yourself and stuff. And then that's relevant to look into just on its own accord, without having all of the baggage of that. But this reminds me of all of these terrible times that I don't want to feel about, and I don't want to associate her with these things. You don't have to. It's an unconscious or subconscious uh mental flash that's coming up. But that association, that mental flash that shows up, that gives you an image in the mind of your mom or that situation. A, not you who's doing it. B, it's not a just because it shows up, it doesn't have any bearing on the current moment. Um, it's like, if there's like some weird, this is such a, I don't know, you can tell I'm very tired today, and so my mind is just meh. But this is like a really random thing. It's like if we had a car that had like an algorithm that every time we drive by like McDonald's, it shows you on the little screen an advertisement for McDonald's, right? It doesn't mean that you have to take that advertisement and go into McDonald's. It's not that it's doing something that you need to pay attention to. It's just an
Right.
algorithm that says every time we get to this certain place, I'm going to pop up a little advertisement for this thing. I'm going to pop up this little memory of this situation. And then you can choose in that moment to either buy into it and then, oh, yeah, actually, I do think I want a Big Mac. Or like, no, you know what? That has no relevance to where I am right now. And I can completely disregard that. And so that's in that moment a possibility.
I see. And it's actually a good way of explaining it. So,
Yeah.
even even though you felt like it was maybe kind of an oddball explanation, it did the job. Could you go back to something a minute ago? You said something about how to break the association, and
Yeah,
I didn't get to hear all of it.
that's
Uh,
okay.
if you could just briefly tell me again what you said about breaking the association.
Yeah. So when you are there, that's actually also another good thing. And this popped into my head when you were talking before, as um I remember in one of those people who, like, we with a grain of salt, I recommend some of the things that he has said. Osho has the orange
Oh
book,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I always love, he has this little meditation thing. It's not really a meditation, but it's like a little waking up thing that anytime throughout the day, just like randomly call out your name and then respond. And it does something very jarring. It does something very jarring. If you just go like, Todd, I'm here, it puts you for a second in this like, oh, I am right here. Like, this is weird. And it's like you're suddenly very alert and very like out of thoughts and like right in the moment. And I know it sounds
Huh.
crazy, but there's something to be said for if you are lost in that train of thought where it's like when this popped up to mind when you were saying about how some of these things feel really sticky and you get this kind of like train of thoughts and the bodily sensation,
Yeah.
to just kind of, if you can do it out loud, it's great. If not, maybe even just try it in your mind, but just say like, Darrell, or Darrell, are you here? And then see what happens, because it really changes your mental state for a moment and it cuts off that perseveration instantly.
Okay. That's funny. That reminds me of something I used to do, and I'd completely forgotten about it until you mentioned it now. I used to do this thing where, in similar situations, or in these kinds of situations, I would just just in my mind, tell myself, "Wake up."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And as long as you take the advice in
Hmm.
that moment and like snap to. Um, it can be really potent. So the first thing I would say is to do something like that to snap you into right where you are.
Get back here.
Get back here. And then notice if that thought that is showing up, like that when you're with Susanna and all of a sudden you have this memory that shows up of some associated thing in the past from with your mom or something, noticing that that image that shows up, a, not here in the room,
Mm,
b, she is not your mother, she is,
right.
noticing like what the differences are in between there, not the similarities, but find those differences.
Okay.
Recognize what is happening in the body right now, and is the emotional state and is the physical sensation state of the body now actually relevant to caregiving of Susanna in this moment, or is this related to the memory that just came up? This feeling of abandonment, this feeling of being wrong, of being however it shows up, is that actually relevant now? Or is that just something that happened long, 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 long time ago? And every time I'm in even the most vaguely related situation, even the, it's such a stretch, it still comes back. It's very much the thing with like PTSD, where people who are in war, Fourth of July comes around, they know it's Fourth of July, they know it's fireworks, and still the body reacts as though they're in a war zone. It's still, it's like this just immediate thing that pops up, that even something when it's not happening, it's so, the mind feels like it's in some way related enough that it kind of takes over and brings this up. So in that moment, it's so important to come back to where you are right now in the room, recognizing that this is not happening right now. It can help to say, like, this is not happening, I'm safe, I'm here with Susanna. Like, bring yourself back to the present moment, recognize the feelings that you are having, just feel them, let them be without playing into them. They're going to go away in seconds or so. When that has happened, see if what's here now has, like, is this now um a relevant sensation to the situation that I'm in right now? you know does this one seem synonymous or uh appropriate for the situation, or does this feel like it's related to something which is not currently here? Am I still responding to a chainsaw wielding clown who is no longer in the room? It's like that kind of a thing. And then splitting it apart so that you're always aware that there is a mental image here. There is a thought that says, ooh, this reminds me of my mom. Ooh, this is, I don't want this to be, I don't want to think this. Because as soon as you have those thoughts, you're reinforcing the fact that it's real. You're reinforcing that not wanting things to be a certain way. So you're pushing away on it, but you're also making it so that it's something that is actual. You don't need to do that.
The not wanting it makes it real.
Yeah, you're it's like, if I decide that it's, so hot in this room and I really want it to be cooler, the more I believe that it's really, really hot in this room, the more I'm proving to myself that it's true.
I see.
So if I really don't want to associate Susanna with my mom, you're already from the starting point that is a possibility, and it's a problem if you do it, and that this is something that I now have to fend away, because if it happens, oh my God, I'm, ruining my life. Instead, what you're having is a mental image that pops up of a time in your life and a sensation that arises with the mental image. The idea that that is an association with Susanna and that is causing some greater turmoil in your life is something that you're creating out of it. It's another layer of stress and suffering and complication. which is an assumption based on a premonition of a future,
Mm.
instead of just being with what's here, which is, oh, I'm in a room with my wife and I just had a thought about my mom. This image just popped up.
It seems so obvious when you tell me, when you explain this.
Yeah.
Uh, Yet at the same time, it couldn't have been any further away from my mind
Yeah.
over the last week or two.
Of course. That's the way it is. When we're that in the middle of it, we can't see, outside of it. It's like you need that outside perspective, that distance on it to effectively let you know to take off the virtual reality headset that you forgot was on. It's like, oh, right. It's like when you're looking for your glasses and you can't find them because you're wearing them.
Right.
It's like, yeah, they're on your face.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you. It should be very obvious, but it wasn't. Right.
Yeah.
So that.
Excuse me. So, in my mind, the way I've been thinking about and understanding caffeine use, another thing that's cropped up in the last couple of weeks is eating junk food, which
Mm,
I very, very rarely do. It's,
yeah.
kind of thing happens maybe once or twice a year, and usually like birthday or something like that.
Yeah.
Now I'm eating donuts on a regular basis. Um, and
Yeah.
it's right in there with the caffeine. It's, you do it, and then afterwards, there's this regret.
That's exactly what I was saying though, is if you get rid of the coffee or the caffeine and then you're finding you're going to chocolate, or in this case donuts or something else, it has nothing to do with the donuts. It has nothing to do with the coffee.
Right,
They're all just, it could be heroin. It could be anything that has some sort of self-soothing, take me out of the moment, take me out of my thoughts, numbing kind of quality.
right. And you mentioned it earlier, and it's grouped in there as well as the whole thing with kratom. And
Yeah.
I don't want any of these habits. And in
Yeah.
my mind, I've been thinking about all of this in terms of Fetters 4 and 5, and
Yeah.
I've just been hoping that in this process, these things can be undone. You
Yeah.
know,
It's a combination. Yeah, there is some Fetter 3 in there. There's also, because that's what we're doing things for a purpose, but it's also,
yeah.
it's a defense mechanism from feeling things in Fetter 2. So it's a bit complicated.
Wow.
But,
Okay.
but like Pernilla mentions this a lot, especially because you brought up the donuts, that sugar is a numbing agent, that we use that. She was saying, she was
I had
actually
no
talking.
idea.
Yeah, there was a study that they did, actually one of those like awful animal studies where
Oh,
they took mice and they gave one sugar and the other not, and they put them on like hot plates and then gradually heated it up, and then the ones who had the sugar were able to withstand the heat longer than the ones who didn't. And then
wow.
they did like an emotional version on it where they took baby mice away from their parents. And again, they gave sugar to one half and not to the other. And the ones with sugar were able to withstand the time apart from their parents longer before they started crying and feeling it, because it's an emotional numbing agent. So when you find that you're reaching for sugar or something like that, see again, am I trying to numb something that I'm feeling right now that I don't want to feel?
Well, I think so. I mean, because like I said, I don't know if I made this clear. Within pretty short order of her coming home that day from the surgery, the associations with her and my mom, and not just her and my mom, but that those two different time periods. When my mom was diagnosed and the house shut down, or the time she went to the hospital and we were shuttled off, my younger sister and I were taken out of the house and sent off to stay with her sister
Yeah.
for a couple of weeks. Which we don't have to get into it, but you can kind of imagine um, what kind of feelings and thoughts that brought up for a young kid.
Absolutely.
So all of that showed up pretty quickly, and then we add to that, um, you know, if we go through these cycles, and we'd had a break for about 6 or 8 weeks. Well, I don't know. Susanna thinks she knows where it is. She thinks that has something to do with the girl she's friends with at school. But Tuesday put the target back on my forehead, and she's been singling me out for stuff, and I'm back on the bad guy list. Um, so I've got at least a couple of different things that have
Yeah.
a lot of emotional intensity all happening at the same time.
Yeah. I was gonna
Yeah.
say too, notice if when you said about having been shuttled off and all of that, notice if any of that stuff that comes up, again, it's not actually happening, it's not relevant to this particular situation, so you can actually ask yourself, is this relevant to my situation now? And in some cases that might be useful to break you out of it, but it's also possible that that situation is coming up because it's a metaphor for something else which you are currently still concerned about in this situation. Like
I'm
when you
not sure I quite follow that second
yeah.
point.
So like when you said, if you're a kid, you're being shuttled off, your mom is taken away into a hospital or something, some of those thoughts are, is my mom going to die? Is she going to, you're dealing with the possibility of mortality and, concern of being alone and all of that stuff. Is some of whatever you were feeling then, is some of that applicable to fears in 2024 about Susanna or about you or about something else which is relevant to your situation now, which isn't just about what it felt like to be a kid, but something which is calling out for your attention now because there's an unresolved nature, worry about Susanna surviving, about her having a series of gradually worsening health conditions or
Let me grab her real
yep.
quick. Sorry.
That's all right.
You come here. And then you run off? Okay. Do you want to come here or not? Come on. What? Do you want to come here? Come on. Come on. Want to come here or not? Come on.
So funny.
Uh, um, okay, so let me kind of wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying things from that time period that um, were left unresolved or unaddressed, having some relevance or connection to what's going on right now. Did I understand that correctly?
Maybe even not that they were unresolved or unaddressed, but
Okay.
what you were feeling or concerned about back then. If those things are showing up now, are you concerned about something similar in a slightly different 2024 perspective?
So, in other words, having fears, concerns, what have you, about things going on here currently
Yeah.
that are similar to things that were going on then.
Exactly. Yeah. Are
Okay.
they coming up because they are a relevant metaphor for something that you are um, either not aware of now or not addressing or not giving enough attention now that has its own version now?
So, the thing to do in trying to um, get some insight to that is to, if I'm understanding this correctly, to try to find um, what in terms of what is being felt, um, try to find similarities between what's going on currently and what was happening then.
Yeah, effectively, but like not from quite as much of like a cerebral kind of standpoint. It's
Okay.
more like if you're in a situation with her and then you all of a sudden get a memory of something from when you were a kid, and you feel what you were feeling then. If, you know, we already went through one way of working with that, but the other is to see, because of the way that you phrased it, it kind of popped to mind that possibility that, like, if there was, you suddenly remember what it was like to be carted off, and your mom is going away and you're going the opposite direction with somebody
Mhm.
else, and all the fears that come up with that. Just check in to see, are those, like, whatever pops to mind, and it's kind of one of those, like, first thought best thought kind of things. Like,
Okay.
you don't have to keep digging for it to be like, oh well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Like, it's one of those things where as soon as you feel it, those kind of first thoughts that pop up, like,
Mhm.
oh no, what if she dies and we're alone, something like that, like just spontaneous thing of that you might have felt when you were a kid. See, now, does that thing apply in this current situation? Is there something there that is just spontaneous thought? It might be many other different things, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I don't know that anything quite that specific
Hmm.
or well defined has
Hmm.
shown up. I'll give you an example from it's been in the last couple of days. Um, I was leaving to take Tuesday to school, and she was going to lay back down and rest. And I, just as a matter of course, in the morning, once it starts to get light, I open up the blinds and turn on lights and things like that.
Hmm.
And kind of amusing that I have that tendency that goes, that habit goes all the way back to the reaction I had to when my mom was diagnosed with MS, and um, she tried to keep everything dark,
Hmm.
and I couldn't deal with it. It was, I don't know that I thought of it this way at the time, but it did seem depressing.
Hmm.
Um, and anyway, so I'm opening blinds, turning on lights, and she asked me if I could keep the blinds in a couple of rooms closed, and then either turn off or turn down some lights. And I really resisted it, and I said something to her about, well, can I just open these blinds here, and I'm just going to wind up turning those lights on when I come back home. And we kind of went back and forth, and so I finally just left everything as she asked. But I felt uncomfortable inside. I really, given my choice, I would have resisted it, and I wanted to, but I wasn't going to
Hmm.
press it any further because she's already got enough going on. She doesn't need me adding to her any discomfort and difficulties by insisting that things go a particular way.
Yeah.
But I could still feel that resistance, even though I dropped it and left alone. I could still feel, um, I would prefer not to do this. I really wish I could do this differently. Just feeling, um, I don't know. I guess aversion and resistance internally
Yeah.
to what was happening there.
Good.
Um,
And that's a moment where you can feel into, then, what is it, just the resonance with that memory from the past, and the depressive quality that you attributed to the darkness back then? Or
mhm.
is there something now that still feels, if it was, again, if you just completely woke up, had no memory of anything that ever happened in childhood,
Mhm.
what would it feel like to have closed curtains and dim light?
Oh, okay, yeah, right. Probably wouldn't be anything beyond. It's kind of dark. Why don't we open some blinds in here?
Yeah. So feel into, then, where is that resistance to allowing it to just be that way? I know you said you felt it, and that's great. Um, as you're feeling that resistance, wanting it to be otherwise,
Mhm.
hold on a second as I just kind of feel into it with you. Um, do you have, when you have that tension, that tightness, that feeling of resistance,
Mhm.
are there conscious associations going on beyond just the, like, initial, oh, this reminds me of? Then does that fall away and there's just the resistance to it? do they continue?
I think, best that I can recall after the fact, I think the associations fall away and it's just resistance. Just simply, I
Okay.
don't like this.
Okay, good. And see if you can feel into when that happens. What is it that I don't like about this? Why don't I like having the windows closed or the curtains closed?
Okay, I can do that, but my suspicion is that it's going to be kind of circular and it's going to come back to um, I couldn't stand the way this felt in that situation as a kid.
Yeah, but again, you're not in the situation as a kid.
Oh
So
yeah, you're
what is
right.
it? So what is it
Okay.
now that gives you that feeling of I don't like this? Can you come at it fresh?
So in other words, drop the association.
Drop the association for a minute and just see with what is here now in the room here. Yes, you might have a preference for a bright, well lit room, but is there a problem with the curtains being closed and with the lights being dimmed if that's what she needs? Why
Okay.
does it actually make you feel uncomfortable? If it wasn't for that association, is there anything here that is actually problematic?
I'm gonna won't know until I get a chance to try it, but I'm gonna
Of
guess no.
course. Yeah.
I would think not.
So, but this is all about the exploration. It's all about to see what it does. And then if you do find that immediately it just brings up one of those feelings in the body, one of those emotional memories, and just be with that and recognize that this is not necessarily relevant to this current moment.
Okay.
This isn't that. And you can console yourself. You can do those practices that we talked about and be like, it's okay. I'm safe. It's okay to have the curtains closed. This is just what Susanna wants right now. It's not permanent.
Okay. Hmm.
See what that does for the situation.
Okay. Kind of interesting that, or coincidental, kind of interestingly coincidental that um, what you said a minute ago about this really touching Fetters 2 and 3 as well as 4 and 5, because you recall from the email
Yeah.
conversation that's where I wound up going back to
Yeah.
when I resumed actively pursuing this earlier this week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, on the way home from picking Tuesday up today, I was listening to, uh, I believe it was the first lesson in the third fetter that had some things that directly correlate to this. So it just seems to kind of, it seems to be getting reinforced from multiple angles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
For whatever reason, things do seem to be timely like that. It
yeah.
does. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, could it have happened in a way that was easier, not as much feeling like I had it all dumped on me at once? Sure, but you know, I if I could go back and do it differently, I wouldn't.
Yeah, because we don't know if maybe this is what you need for, in this moment to get through some of this stuff. If it was more gentle and paced out, we don't know. Maybe it wouldn't have been as pronounced for you to actually start to see it and be able to really work with it in a way that really uproots these old issues.
Well, and you know, figuring out that whole thing about the I don't know if I mentioned this or not, that when I started in with the with Pernilla's videos on Monday morning, that uh, talking about finding those underlying beliefs, and of course we know about the one about being the problem, but then within 24 hours, um, what showed up was another underlying belief about um, um, being a failure, being a loser,
Mm,
that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, and in particular, some really, uh, I'm not sure what the word is for it. It's just some really, um, for lack of a better word, brutal moments with my younger sister where, she just said things that, um, still all these years later, um, I can just still kind of feel the knife,
Yeah.
uh,
No.
you know, and so that, that awareness of that came up, and it wasn't like it was something that was completely new. This was something that I had some awareness of going years back, but something just like with the whole thing about being the problem, something about the way it came up and the context it came up in, it had um, a very clear, full awareness. Is just absolutely right in the center of the attention, full light of awareness and attention on it. And as a result of that, I don't know, but for whatever reason, in with that being how it showed up, it just had a real punch to it. It
Mhm.
really had just, I mean, it really hit hard.
Yeah.
And then, there's all this stuff with Susanna and my mom and all the stuff with Tuesday. And it all just seemed to kind of reinforce each other.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was pretty uncomfortable there for about 20 or 24, 48 hours. I didn't shirk away from it. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. It, I guess I did. There are the substances that are being used, um, which now that, what you mentioned about sugar as a numbing agent, um, that kind of puts a new spin on things. But at any rate, uh, I'm kind of disappointed to say. On one hand, there is some sort of avoidance tactic at work, but on the other hand, when they come up, I don't I don't push them away or ignore them. I do try to let them. I do my best to let them be and feel them.
Yeah.
I laid in bed this morning. Some anger came up around all this stuff while I was laying in bed this morning after I got back from taking Tuesday to school, and I laid there for, oh gosh, it must have been 45 minutes. I just stayed with it and just let it happen, just
Yeah.
felt it. Um, so when it comes to doing this work, when it comes to 2, 3, and I guess 4 and 5, um, I guess sometimes it's just like that.
Yeah, it is. And I just want to say too, like when you said about, the memories of things that your sister said that were like still just like a knife, like you feel the stab. Remember though, if we if we feel any of that, it's because there still is an inherent belief in the truth of it in us.
Yes.
So it's still something that's relevant in you to even be able to feel that there's any sort of veracity to it that could hurt.
And that occurred to me as that was happening, as the stuff was coming up, and remembering that. I remember you having mentioned that before,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was the question: is why do I believe this?
Yeah.
Not only why do I believe it, but how in the hell do I believe it? I
Well,
mean,
I was gonna say, yeah.
what
And do you really like what part of you believes it? What part of you feels like that is actually true?
I don't know.
Are you relying on evidence? Like if it comes up and it
Oh,
feels true, do you have evidence to support it that immediately?
no, not evidence that is what's the word I'm looking for? I don't have evidence that's irrefutable. I mean,
Mhm.
I could say something like, "Oh well, that's the way most people feel." Like for instance, one of the things that reinforces it is the position I am in this house.
Mhm.
Having given up the work that I did to be at home,
Yeah.
um, and uh, I can say, well, that's the way people feel about it. So there must be some truth to it. Well, let's turn that around. Why is it okay? No offense to anyone here, but why is it that it's perfectly okay for a woman to occupy that position, but it's not for a male?
Yeah.
That's just a double standard. And there's absolutely no basis or logic to that.
Right.
So, no, I don't have any irrefutable evidence. All I have is convention, in terms of the conventions we live by. Um, uh, um, uh, Appeal to authority arguments,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, those sorts of things. No, I don't have anything that um, can't be taken apart, broken down, or shown to be untrue in some way.
So it really helps to continually deconstruct that. Anytime
Mm-hmm.
that you have this thought that I am a loser, I am whatever,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where is my evidence for that right now? Do I actually believe this? Do I have any reason to believe that this is the case? And then break it down.
Well, that's going to be very relevant in the coming days and weeks. So I'm going to be giving myself a reminder to remember to do that.
Good. Because all it is again, any belief is just a reoccurring pattern of thought. It's a
Wow,
thought
that's
that's
a
been had.
great. Any belief is just a reoccurring pattern of thought. That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
that's all it is, right? It's
Yeah.
a thought that has been thought multiple times. And there are like other thoughts that tend to corroborate it because they also are recurring thoughts. They're like recurring corroboratory thoughts.
So it's just circles within circles within circles.
Exactly.
Okay, I don't ever want to forget that. That's great.
So all we need to do is not to not to uproot a belief in such because it's not a real thing. It's just a pattern of thought. So we're effectively deconditioning that pattern of thinking.
By
We're
deconstructing it.
oh, your mic went again. That's so weird.
Has it come back yet?
No, say something more.
Hello. Is this thing on?
It's weird that it goes low all of a sudden.
I need to start restarting my computer before we begin these
Oh,
things.
nope, came back. Okay, that did it.
Wow.
Yep.
So
Uh,
what you're saying is, I can't remember exactly what you're saying, but deconstructing it is how we undermine these things, recondition them.
yeah, because it's that same sort of idea that we had where it was my metaphor of the ball bearing rolling down like a wooden channel.
Right.
It's like when we have a belief, it's like, oh, okay, this is a very well-worn channel that the each thought ball is rolling across. And so it's very easy to have reoccurring I'm a loser, I'm a loser, I'm a loser, and all these different facets and all the different manifestations that comes up. And what we're doing is breaking that the ease of that chain of that channel being followed, and we're saying, hold on a second, new belief here or new thought comes in, new thought. Let's back that up with evidence. Let's figure out, is there any actual veracity to to this thought? And it's the same as that sort of thing with when the memories show up about your mom. Is that a valid thought now? There is a habitual uh, association between certain memories and certain current situations, but are they actually connected in any way? Is there any relevance here? If not, sever the connection. Recognize right now that these two things are separate. When you have that thought about me being a bad person, a scapegoat, a loser, unsuccessful, however it shows up, where is my proof of that right in this moment? Who is it even relating to? It's this whole self self creating narrative of one who has been here this whole time and who is definable in a certain way.
Well, the thing that suddenly comes to mind is at any given moment, I can stop and notice. I'm not sure what to call them, but there are things I can notice about sensory experience. Um, if that's even it, I'm not sure what it is, but there's something that can be noticed that makes it really clear that there's not some sort of enduring central agent directing things.
Yep.
And so, and I mean, that's something that sometimes I don't even have to notice. A lot of times it does it by itself. I have this funny thing that happens when I walk down this hall to come back to this room or even leave this room. I've been noticing it for several weeks now. It used to feel like there was somebody going down the hall to do something.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't feel like there's anybody going anywhere. There's just this thing happening. I don't even know what to
Wonderful.
call it. There's not,
Yeah, yeah.
not even really a nice, convenient label for it. It's just this is happening, and
Wonderful.
and it's something that it just it just becomes really clear all on its own. Wow, no one going anywhere. And it used to feel like, because usually if I'm coming back here, I'm doing something. There's a reason.
Yeah.
And typically, if I'm heading back the other way, often same thing. There's a reason. There's something
Yep.
going on. Got to go do. And so that sense of somebody going somewhere for some reason is just gone. My
That's
point in
wonderful.
saying all of this is that I wrote something earlier today when I was writing about all of this stuff. Something about these ideas that were instilled early on, creating a negative self view.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's this sense, the sneaking, very subtle sense of something that makes me think, well, is there still something that hasn't been seen through? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what I'm picking up on, is that there are these negative ideas about the character named Darrell,
Yeah.
and some of that weight and substance comes from these ideas, these beliefs that are still hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's very possible. And just as you've seen through so many times, so many aspects of that sense of self, it's recognizing that there are beliefs about a character who does not exist. You have beliefs about many fictional characters that you've watched on movies, right? Like, I like this one, I hate this one, all of that. You have beliefs about them and their backstories, and it's the same thing. If I brought up Batman, you have an idea about Batman and whether you like Batman, not why you like him or not, all of that stuff. There's no difference between that and Darrell in terms of the associations. One feels more personal because there have been all of these self-referential thoughts about it. It's been a whole life of people talking about Darrell and only occasionally talking about Batman. But it doesn't mean that Darrell is any more real than Batman, or that Darrell has any more solidity and that those beliefs are in any way more valid about Darrell than they are about Batman. You've just been in the center of the debate the whole time.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you're saying about the belief just is just a recurring thought pattern. Well,
Yeah,
there are more of those recurring thought patterns about the Darrell than there
exactly.
ever have been about Batman.
Exactly. Exactly. So just being aware when they show up. And it can be like another vague self sense that's in there that's like, it's like we have that feeling of like being located in a certain area.
Right.
Like there's an idea, there's this feeling of location here as opposed to over there. And it's that same sort of thing. It can be that there's this overlay of thought about like, well, I'm a very nice guy who everybody loves, or I am a really terrible person who, barely deserves to exist. there is like a filter through which everything is being seen. So me sitting on the couch isn't just me sitting on the couch. It's either me being, you know, I really deserve to be able to sit here and enjoy myself because I've done such wonderful things today, or I really don't deserve to be comfortable. You know, I'm really just being lazy, and I should really get up and do something else because I don't. It's just sitting on a couch, but all of the thoughts that come about it are filtered through a certain belief about this. So it's really noticing all of those ways that that is coloring and creating the world of your experience.
When you say all the ways that we're coloring, creating your experience of the world, you're talking
Yeah.
about just the thoughts and ideas that we have about.
Effectively, yes. I mean, and your interpretations of the stuff that you see. So it's like
Okay.
it, the interpretation of whether I don't know, whether Susanna is calling on you too many times in a night or not. That is even going to be colored by your experiences of, how you're feeling about you and her and all of that. Like there's nothing neutral that you're experiencing that doesn't have some basis in bias or judgment or something else. And it's really being aware of how much am I actually interacting from an unbiased, uh, um, uh, objective viewpoint of this situation, and how much is based off of my whole bullshit backpack, as Pernilla calls it, of beliefs and associations and feelings of how I am and how she is and how it should be versus how it really is. All of that is coloring our experience if we're not aware of it. It's still coloring our experience even when we are aware of it, but it has less power when we're aware of the fact that we just don't have a clean experience, and that's okay. It's problematic when we are completely oblivious to the fact that we don't have a clear, clean experience, but we think that it is.
So we need to learn to be aware of, pay attention to our descriptive mental noise about things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yep.
No.
And even the very subtle ways that it shows up. It might not be something as uh, uh, obvious as saying, like, hearing your voice in your mind saying, oh, again, why does she have to get up again? It might not be that visual. That might be there, and then noticing that there's an idea and it should be different, and there's a bias and there's a judgment behind that, so that's there. But it might also just be in that felt sense in the body that just feels like, there's something that's just like not okay, even if it's not verbalized, even if it doesn't have a mental thing behind it. What is here that feels uh that is in a resistance to the way things are? And is that actually relevant to your moment here, or is that something which has an unperceived unconscious filter that is causing it?
Okay. Boy, so many things to do to um, wake up to all the things that are going on that are
Yeah.
creating, coloring our experience. Um, but okay, so that's I try to pay more attention to that, be more aware of that.
Yeah,
Huh. Okay.
it was a lot.
Yeah, it was. It was. And in light of the level of demand, energy output, the way things have been around here lately, uh, there's not as much energy for that as there normally
Yeah.
would be. So
No, but that's why, again, I really reiterate: be kind and compassionate to yourself. Make sure you're taking care of yourself in a way that you're not giving out more than you're taking in, because it's not sustainable.
Yeah, I've been pretty conscious I guess this last week about giving myself a break when I'm not doing anything,
Yeah.
which is something that there are varying degrees of acceptance for or being ill at ease with,
Yeah.
to be able to just sit still and not do anything. So I've been really aware of just giving myself permission to, okay, I'm not going to do anything for the next hour. I'm just going to sit here. She's asleep. There's nothing going on. There aren't any demands. I'm going to watch this interview with whoever for
Yeah.
the next
Nice.
hour, and
Nice.
so I've been doing quite a lot of it actually, at least
Good.
as time permits.
Good. I'm glad. It's really important to feel like there's a self-care happening and not just depleting.
Right. And the funny thing is I have no idea where that came from, but I've had people tell me that kind of thing in the past. Be kind to yourself, take care of yourself. Be compassionate with yourself, and it's a great idea, but it never translates into an um, actually doing it. Well,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, in this last week, it has shown up. So
I'm glad about that because and this is, spoken from a place of uh experience. When I was taking care of my mom for a lot of years, everybody was telling me, you have to make time for yourself, you have to do that, and I was not doing it, and it leads to such awful burnout. It is just, it's not feasible. You really have to do it. I mean, thankfully with Susanna, it's a temporary thing,
right,
but still, you really have to do it.
yeah.
Yeah. No good
Well,
comes from no good comes from martyrdom or you know absolute self-sacrifice like that. It's just not healthy.
well, yeah, you're right, and I recognize that. So I'm doing it the best way I know how.
Good.
However falteringly that might be.
Donuts and coffee.
I recognize that this is going to pass,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's not something that is really that there's any good feeling about or is even really welcome as it's happening.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, sure, I could be doing things that are a lot worse. These could be actions that could
Oh,
really
absolutely.
be really, truly, uh, um, uh, they could be actions that truly have, um,
Well, ramifications for
yeah, or really affect other people
yeah.
in substantial ways. So, fortunately, that's not the case, but still, you know,
And I think that's really relevant to also applaud yourself for the fact that we're talking about something as minor as donuts and coffee being
yes,
the issues that you're using, as or the substances that you're using for feeling dealing with emotional stress and strain and all of that, and that you're so dedicated to rooting out all of this stuff that even those things aren't flying under the radar. Those aren't just getting the societal pass because everybody drinks coffee and eats donuts. That you're recognizing the fact that they are being used as an agent for manipulation of mood and emotion and sensation, and that in this kind of work, it's also relevant to look at. So I applaud you for that.
well, thank you. And it's funny that you say that because I thought about that a couple of days ago. I thought this would be so easy to just let it slide because if you
Really?
told virtually anybody in the United States,
Yeah.
you said to them, this is a real problem for me, coffee and donuts, they would look at you like like you had three eyes or
Completely.
something. They look at you like you're nuts. And
Completely.
well, I don't care. Those aren't my standards.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
so I think use that also to, when you have those moments of negative self-talk, remind yourself you are um so diligent and so honest with your experience that you're not even letting these things slide, and let that help change that narrative
Okay.
of being you know, failure, not good enough, whatever else. It's like that's a real level of diligence and integrity.
I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's
absolutely.
helpful. Um, yeah, because you know, really the idea is, or the desire, the hope for is no habits. I mean, not of that
Yeah,
kind. I
yeah,
mean, we can't exist in this world without
no,
some degree of a variety of habituation
yep,
for things. But those things, for those reasons, that's really, there's just no tolerance for those. There's
no,
the ideal is to have none of them.
yeah.
You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, they cause, it's an issue if it's causing suffering. And obviously, it is causing some suffering. You have it, you just regret that you had it. You don't feel as good after you've had it as before. You're using it in a way that it's for manipulation of being, as opposed to just really enjoy donuts. And every now and then a donut just hits the spot. And then, and if there's no attachment to when you don't have a donut, like it's that thing. Like if you're just as okay having a donut as not having a donut, but you enjoy the donut and there's no like guilt repercussions to having had a donut, then it's fine. It's a problem if you are, oh, but I really wanted that donut, and now I'm gonna have to have something else to take its place because I have such a craving for donut. I'm gonna drive all over the city to find that donut that I really wanted, and and I'm gonna be angry all day because I didn't have the donut that I've been craving all morning, and that's just gonna ruin my day. That's an issue. Or I
yeah.
eat the donut and it's like, oh, I'm such a pig. Shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? That's, again, it's problematic. So
Well, yeah, and you know, even before all of this came my way, there has, you know, for some time there's been an understanding that it's just not in the best interest of a person to live their life from the basis of doing things to blunt or numb out feelings.
yeah,
Um, and then, of course, you know, being involved in this process of unbinding, um, now I understand um, that it's necessary to feel these things, to feel them and let them be felt. Um, so I'm not willing to just continue on indefinitely, um, trying to manage these unpleasant sensations like this.
yeah, yeah, amazing. Look forward to it. Have a good one. Thanks so
Take
much,
care.
man. You too. Bye.